The Greater Exodus, a study on when, where, and how. Now, one of the factors there when we start talking about when is we have to still wait until the Antichrist is revealed. Until that happens, things just happen to look good. And all we're doing is saying these things happen to look good. So, with that being said, and realizing that until the Antichrist is revealed, it's just things that we're looking for. However, we still will study the where we go and how we get there. So, with that being said, let's kind of start, and we'll start with the when, because that's actually the more, well, I won't say the more important thing, but it's the thing that I really enjoy doing. So, to do this, we have to have two agreements, even if they're only for purposes of argument. One, we have to have an agreement that the time of Jacob's trouble and the Great Tribulation are a total of 7 years, 3.5 and 3.5 for each of them. And the second thing to have an agreement for, again, just for purposes of argument, is that the Messiah is likely to return on trumpets because it's the next feast in line. Again, remember, he died on Passover, buried before unleavened bread, rose on first fruits. The Holy Spirit was given again on Shavuot. He should return again on Sukkot. First and second resurrection from Revelation 20 should be on Day of Atonement, and heaven comes to earth, and the wedding feast on Sukkot. So, with that being said, let's now work to the interesting part of this. And the next phrase that I say is not going to sound related, but it is. When you do your taxes, do you do them from January 1st to December 31st or January 1st to January 1st? And actually, you do them from January 1st to December 31st, and here's instruction on that. Now, the reason that you do January 1st to December 31st is because if you do January 1st to January 1st, it's a year and one day. Why is this an important issue? Because if he's going to return on trumpets, we would go back 7 years, two trumpets, and then add one day. Because if we go trumpets to trumpets, that's 7 years and one day. So the first key is to learn when was trumpets. Now I'm going to start with a very specific year, and there's a reason why I'm using this particular year as we'll walk through this. And I'm looking at 2017. So the first question is, when was the new moon sighted in Jerusalem in September 2017, which would be the 7th month? And here's a link that shows you that it was on the night of the 21st. So because it's on the 21st, we know that trumpets was the night of the 21st and the day of the 22nd. So the following day would be the night of the 22nd and the day of the 23rd. Now, I'm going to show you where the link comes from, but again, by all means, test things yourself, just like you should test when the new moon was sighted. You should also test what I'm ready to show you, and it's a very easy thing to do. Just go to your computer and type in September 23rd, 2017, and on the top row it'll say videos, news, images. Click images. That's all you have to do. You don't have to say anything other than the date. And this image is going to show up. Now, what's interesting about this particular image is that it's not occurred in 7,000 years and won't occur again for another 7,000 years. Some of you who have watched certain things for the years have recognized, oh, I heard about that back in 2017, and that was supposed to be something for the rapture, or, that's when we should have been leaving, something for the greater exodus. No, that's the start of a chapter. The chapter is the timeline chapter, but that's just a start. So they didn't place it where it's supposed to be placed. Now, what was special about this particular sign, because those planets line up like that every 250 years approximately. But what has not happened in 7,000 years and won't happen for another 7,000 years is that Jupiter was in retrograde inside the belly of Virgo. And so as we come around the sun, this is what retrograde is. As we come around the sun, here it's being the sun, and Jupiter being an outer planet, we catch it because it's slower and pass it. As we do, it appears from our vantage point on Earth that it does a small circle. It doesn't. It's still going forward. It's just because of our vantage point as we catch up to it and pass it that it looks like it does a circle. Well, in this particular year, it did a retrograde action, a circle, inside the belly of Virgo for 41 weeks, which is the length of pregnancy. So, with that being said, we're going to then turn to Revelation 12 in your Bible. And from Revelation 12, what we get in the first two verses, we're looking at what we potentially saw in the sky. And again, until we see the Antichrist being revealed, we don't know this for certain. It's just something that fits. She's pregnant, cried out in pain, and she's about to give birth. Now, the next issue here is this. We're going to walk through this chapter as, again, a timeline chapter. So in verse 3, in the first 5 words, does it say that the next sign is a great sign or just another sign? Because mine says just another sign. So the next one doesn't have to be special like happening every 7,000 years. An enormous red dragon, and the word dragon there is drakon, which is either a dragon or a huge serpent, with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its head. Now, there are 2 possible constellations that work for this, and there is a constellation called a crown constellation, the Corona Borealis, and these 2 constellations sit on opposite sides of this crown constellation. I think it is the lower of the 2, which is the constellation Serpens, which is the great serpent, but it could be the constellation Draco, which is the dragon constellation. Both of them sit at the feet of Virgo. However, Serpens is closer to the feet of Virgo, and Serpens is also closer. As Jupiter came out of the belly, it went right to the mouth of Serpens. So to me, that's the one that fits. It doesn't mean I'm right. Here is a graphic to show you one where the constellation Serpens is in relationship to constellation Virgo, and where the crown constellation is. So with that being said, we're going to go to verse 4. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth so that it might devour her child the moment she was born. Now again, we've already identified that both of these constellations sit at the feet. However, Serpens is closer to the feet. The 1/3 of the stars happened on October 8, 2017 in what's called the Draconoid meteor shower. 1/3 of all the stars that we can see by the naked eye in the universe landed that night as a meteor shower. So, pretty impressive. That's already happened. Again, assuming we're seeing the right signs. Verse 5. She gave birth to a son, a male child who will rule all nations with an iron scepter, and her child was snatched up to God into his throne. We're going to come back to the issue of being snatched up to God into his throne because it's a very important issue for the timeline. But we're going to concentrate on the first issue here, and that is giving birth. Now, Jupiter left the belly of Virgo on October 13th, 2017. That also happened to be the last high Sabbath of Sukkot that year. And here is the calendar. Now remember, on a calendar, since we've already identified that the new moon was sighted on night of September 21st, to find Sukkot, we would go, as we are told in Leviticus, we go to the 15th day after that. That starts in the fall, and again we have this with the following week we have the high Sabbath behind it. That happened to be on the 13th. Going to the 14th. So we have already an indication that this was on a high Sabbath. So, and again, we're going to come back to the issue of being snatched up to God into his throne. Verse 6, the woman fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. And this is the real interesting part. even people who have seen these first three signs and locked them in to say, I see this for September 23rd, I see it for October 8th, and I see it for October 13th. Nobody yet has done the math on saying, well, let me add 1,260 days. So online, you can pick your own, and I'll show you where I pull up mine, but all of them are going to be the same, and I assume all of them can count. An online calculator for a calendar. Here's mine. So on this calculator, add in October 14th, which again, we're 13th to the 14th. So add in on the far left day, October 14th, 2017, and then add 1,260 days. What is the result? And it's March 27th, 2021. What day is Passover in 2021? Well, amazingly, it looks like our God knows how to count because he's got those counts right there. Just perfectly. For somehow odd reason, this thing perfectly works out. Now, going back, verses 7. 7 through 13 is the war broke out in heaven. Satan and his angels were thrown down to earth. Woe to the earth. He's angry. His time is short. And so he's pursuing the woman. So we're going to pick it back up in verse 14. The woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the wilderness, where she would be taken care of for a time, times, and half a time out of the serpent's reach. Now we know from Daniel that time, times, and half a time is 3.5 years. Times is 2, time is 1, and half is half, so 3.5 years. Now again, that's out of the serpent's reach, but on the wings of a great eagle. Did you hear on that? Did you hear Exodus 19:4? Because that's what you should have heard. That's the first time the word eagle is used in the Bible. You yourselves have heard what I did to and how I brought you out from Egypt on eagle's wings. So again, we have that. Excuse me. We have that indication. This is an Exodus event. We were told when we were leaving, which is the Passover. When did they leave on the first Exodus? They left on Passover. When will we leave on second Exodus? Majority of us are going to leave on Passover. Now, the next 3 verses throw off most people. The first 2, not catching that many people. The woman was given, from out of his mouth the serpent spewed water like a river to overtake the woman and sweep her away in a torrent, but the earth opened up and swallowed the river. In my particular opinion on where we are in time and location, that should be the Mosul Dam in Iraq breaking. Now, the Mosul Dam in Iraq is built on land that has gypsum. It's mostly gypsum under it. And because of it, it's a weak foundation, and it cannot handle the weight of the dam and the water on top of it. Because of that, they are constantly pouring concrete into this gypsum. Every single day they have to pour concrete into it. ISIS took control of that dam for 2 weeks and didn't pour concrete into it, and they have spent over $450 million since then pouring extra concrete trying to get it stabilized because they went 2 weeks without it. I hope that gives you an idea. This is about ready to break. Now, that fits in our time and our location. That doesn't mean it's this particular one. It could be any other thing. It's just, I particularly think it's most likely going to be this dam and location. Now, the other thing that's happening here is this is when the 2 witnesses die. And because it's when the 2 witnesses die, the other thing that we have from it, it's also when those who are in the first resurrection under Revelation 20, it's when they can first die. And people will be saying, well, okay, let's look at Revelation 20. We have a couple standards for what's going to happen to be in the first resurrection. One, you have to be keeping the testimony of the Messiah and the Torah. And you were left behind on Exodus because you didn't go, and you were beheaded for refusal of the mark of the beast. But one of the things there is, when do they die? And if we look at Revelation 14:13, then I heard a voice from heaven say, write this, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, they will rest from their labor, for their deeds will follow them. That is when they can start dying to come in the first resurrection. So if you forgot to leave on Exodus, then you have to make it through the trumpet judgments. And those are going to be very difficult to make it through. First of all, you still have the fourth horseman who has authority to kill 25% of the earth. He's still finishing things up. So you got to not be in that 25%. You have the other issue out there. You have one of the trumpet judgments that's killing 1/3 of the earth, which is in fact roughly the same as another 1/4. So 25 and 25, half the world is gone. Are you going to roll your odds on that you're going to make it through that? And that's assuming you don't die from any of the others, which are killing people like crazy. So if you're willing to roll the dice to say, I'm going to make it through the trumpets so I can come in the first resurrection, which is a great blessing because they get to rule with the Messiah for 1,000 years. So they get a blessing if they make it, but that's really rolling the dice. Now, we go back to, at that point in time, we're going back to Revelation 12, and we're going to pick that back up. And what we'll see in the very last verse is just what I said, as it pertains to that remnant, those who are left behind. Then verse 17, then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring, those who kept God's commands and hold fast their testimony about the Messiah. So again, they kept the Torah and they're following the Messiah. But they're the remnant. They're not the major group. They are the remnant. Now, where do we see this? In other places in Revelation and in Bible. So we're going to kind of stay in Revelation for a while. And we're looking at Revelation 3:3. And Revelation 3:3 is, remember therefore what you have received and heard, hold it fast and repent. Repent, but if you do not wake up, I will come like a thief, and you will not know at what time I will come to you. So those in this church of Sardis do not know about the second Exodus, and so therefore, if they don't wake up and repent, they're going to be left behind. And at that point in time, they have a choice to make. And the Messiah said this as well, and we're going to get to where the Messiah said this. But as we look at Revelation 2, in the persecuted church, which is the church of Smyrna, verse 10, do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. I tell you, the devil will put some of you in prison to test you, and you will suffer persecution for 10 days. Be faithful, even to the point of death, which again, they have to die to do this. And I will give you life as your victor's crown. So we know from Revelation 24, they have to be beheaded. If you're left behind, and if you make it through the trumpet judgments, which again, that's going to be difficult to do. It's rolling the dice. But if you can do that, then you get an incredible blessing if you choose to die. Those who choose to live and take the mark of the beast, whatever, if you choose to live, you're not coming back. So it's a death issue. So from that is a general idea on, and I mean very general, on the when. Now we see some other issues there, and again, I should have a second witness to this. And in fact, I have more than one witness on the timing. But I'm going to do a separate video on those other witnesses on the timing, because this gives us enough to get that issue of when locked in. Now again, nothing is locked in totally until the Antichrist is revealed. And again, he cannot be revealed. We would say can't be revealed right now because he's revealed by stopping the morning and evening sacrifices, and they're not doing the morning and evening sacrifices yet. You can't stop what they're not doing. Now, we don't know when they'll start those. If they're going to use the red heifer, which I believe they would, that red heifer is available anytime after September 5th of this year. That does not mean they're going to use the red heifer to do it, but they most likely will. It also doesn't mean that they're going to do that and start it on September 5th of this year. In fact, most likely they're going to wait until the Antichrist invades Israel. Again, this is my opinion. They can do it, if they're going to follow Torah, they can do it anytime after the 5th. But if they wait until the Antichrist invades, then they might say, and you can imagine them saying, we need to turn to God. And because of that, they would then sacrifice and start taking over the Temple Mount and start the sacrifices. But it's too late at that point. That's what I believe how it will play itself out. But I don't have any Bible verses that say that's when it would when it will happen. That's when they'll start the sacrifices. I don't have anything saying what day they start the sacrifices. I will tell you that that the Creator has not told me. I have not read it. I've not had any dreams or visions on it. So it's just my opinion as to when they'll start it. We do know the day that that the Antichrist invades Israel. We also know the day that the abomination of desolation occurs. That is Daniel 12, and just to kind of tell you, it's not saying in any particular year. It's just saying you can count it and go back to from Passover, and and I've got a separate video on here. I suggest you look at that with regards to Daniel 12. But it will tell you that in any given year, 39 days prior to Passover is when the Antichrist will invade Israel, and 4 days before Passover is when the abomination of desolation will occur. Now, again, that to me is important for a number of reasons. One, it is listed as a messianic miracle. That is not saying the messianic miracle is defined in Torah or taught in Torah. It's something that was taught in Judea and still taught in Judea. That the Messiah, one of the miracles that Messiah could do, there are 4 of them. 1 is healing of a leper. 2, raising a person from the dead after 4 days. 3 is casting out a demon from somebody who is mute. And the other is healing a blind person who was born blind. Those are the 4. Our Messiah did all 4, indicated who he was and his strength. But again, it's not listed in Torah saying this is who the Messiah is if he does one of these things. It's something that is taught. We do know that those people are going to start believing that the Antichrist is the Messiah. It does fit that 4 days before, which is when you get your lamb, if he's the Antichrist and we know our Messiah died on Passover and rose on first fruits, that he might try to die on the day you get your lamb and raise himself on Passover. You know, it's the opposite of what it should be. And we know that the Antichrist lives after getting a mortal head wound. So my particular opinion, and again it is just an opinion, as he probably sacrifices himself on the altar. Now, back at the time of the Maccabees, and when Antiochus IV, he slaughtered a pig on the altar, and he brought a statue of Zeus into the temple. A pig is almost as unclean as you can get, but there's one thing that's more unclean than that, which is a dead human. So I think it would be the dead human on the altar, and we know that the Antichrist comes from the pit. He's just possessing a body. And we'll get to who that would be for the person that he will possess, because that's coming up here shortly. So we've kind of covered the when. So the next issue is the how. How do we go back? Now, the starting point for this is always Deuteronomy. And in Deuteronomy, remember, they had not yet went into the promised land. And because Moses is still alive, and Moses never went into the promised land. So as we turn to Deuteronomy 30, and we'll start in verse 1. When all these blessings and curses I have set before you come on you, and you take them to heart wherever the Lord your God disperses you among the nations. They had not even went into the promised land yet, and he's saying, I'm going to disperse you among the nations. So we know this prophecy is for a future generation. Verse 2, and when you and your children return to the Lord your God and obey him with all your heart and with all your soul according to everything I command you today, Torah, then the Lord your God will restore your fortunes and have compassion on you and gather you again from all the nations where he scattered you. Whether you're in Virginia, Oklahoma, Alaska, New Zealand, Argentina, no matter where you are, from there he will gather you. Verse 4, even if you've been banished to the most distant land under the heavens, from there the Lord your God will gather you and bring you back. He will bring you back to the land that you belong to your ancestors, Israel. You will take possession of it. He will make you more prosperous and numerous than your ancestors, which means we're having children. And so many people think, oh, we'll raptured and we'll just be magically transported to Israel. And again, if you're in the first resurrection, I could see that. But they're in a resurrected body. They can't have children. So this part here is for us who have actually left on the Exodus, because he's bringing us back. Okay? And you can't have children in a resurrected body because you're not married. So, the Lord your God will circumcise your hearts and the hearts of your descendants, so that you may love him with all your heart and with all your soul and live. So, again, a tremendous blessing that not only is he give circumcising our hearts, but he's going to do it for our children. And that's a blessing beyond blessing. So, with that being said, we know that we're going to be going back. So the question then comes in, how do we go back? And for that, we go back to Deuteronomy 28. And in Deuteronomy 28 and in verse 68, excuse me, which is the very last verse in Deuteronomy 28. And somebody will probably point out and say, well, this is the blessings and the curses. You're exactly right. Read through the curses as you look at basically from verse 60 on, and it's saying basically, I'm going to put you among all the nations. So it's the end of all of these curses, the end of the curses. Verse 68, the Lord will send you back in ships to Egypt on a journey I said you should never make again. There you will offer yourselves for sale to your enemies as male and female slaves, but no one will buy you. So we have one, how we go, back in ships. It does not say boat, it said ships. There's a difference. A ship is a method of transport, including a boat. We have a where, Egypt. Where did they leave on the first Exodus? They left from Egypt. So where he'll regather us from all over the place. And anytime you read anything on the second Exodus, the first thing, it's going to be so much broader in scope. Why? Because he brings us from all the earth, brings us to Egypt. Okay? And so what we have here, and again, we have this issue of trying to sell us as slaves. And that may cause you a little bit of apprehension, but that apprehension is going to be gone in about 2 minutes. So with that being said, we have it now in Torah that we're going back by ship, whatever that ship word means. We're going back to Egypt. And again, so the issue then comes, there are older versions of the Bible than what we have. And you will not find this in your current Bible because it's been deleted, unfortunately. So we have to go back to the Greek Septuagint. And I'll give you the page, you can find it online. So here's the link to find it online. And we're going to be looking in Isaiah chapter 11, which is spelled with an E, so it's hard to find because it's E-S-I-A-S. But we're going to go to Isaiah chapter 11. And again, here's showing you where that would be for Isaiah chapter 11. Now, from there, the first thing we have to do is we have to make sure this is talking about the greater Exodus. We don't want to be adding words there that don't belong. We don't want to be saying this is for this particular event if it's not for that particular event. So with that being said, we're going to start in verse 11. So Isaiah chapter 11, verse 11. And it shall be in that day the Lord shall again show his hand to be zealous for the remnant that is left of the people, which shall be left by the Assyrians and from Egypt and from the country of Babylon, and from Ethiopia, and from the Elamites, and from the rising of the sun, and out of Arabia. Could be, because he's regathering, but we need a lot more to say this is the second Exodus. Chapter 12, or verse 12. And he shall lift up a standard for the nations, and he shall gather the lost ones of Israel, and he shall gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. Israel and Judah, now we know this is the greater Exodus. Verse 13, it's just going to hammer it home. And the envy of Ephraim shall be taken away, and the enemies of Judah shall perish. Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah shall not afflict Ephraim. No question, we're now talking without question on a second Exodus. Here's the verse that was changed in your Bible. And they shall fly in the ships of the Philistines. Before I even read any further, what ship flies? And we only have three options. We've got a blimp, a helicopter, or an airplane. So the first mention of an airplane in all human history is Isaiah almost 2,600 years ago. And he's talking about an airplane. And they shall at the same time spoil the sea, which means they're taking boats. And from the east, we can finish up that verse, but it's not really, that's talking about the path, Moab and Ammon as we go through the path of the Exodus. The real next issue you would have is, okay, he said they're going to try to sell us as slaves in Egypt. Why will nobody buy us? Very next chapter, or very next verse tells you why. And the Lord shall make desolate the sea of Egypt, and he shall lay his hand on the river with a strong wind, and he shall smite the seven channels so that men shall pass through it dry shod. He's going to dry up the Nile River. As you can imagine, that would put the Egyptians into a pure panic. You got 99 million Egyptians. When you dry up the Nile River, they know they're all going to die because they don't have water to survive. And they're in a pure panic at that point in time. And just to hammer things home, the two witnesses are alive on earth at that time, and they can add any plague they want just to up the ante. So when you go back, whether you go back by airplane or by boat, and we can pretty well define who's probably going to be on each of these um, forms of transport. But when you go back and you get to Egypt, and they'll probably say you don't have a passport, you don't have a visa, the plane or the boat is probably stolen, and they'll arrest you. Be cocky. Run your mouth a little bit and say, you didn't learn from when Moses was here originally. You're going to learn this time. I'm not leaving empty-handed, and do not leave empty-handed. Now, that being said, you can just say, I'm going to make as much money out of this as I can when I leave here, and I'm going to get the gold and silver that I can and carry with me. Let's be honest, you don't want to be carrying a chair, no matter how nice the chair is, because you don't want to be carrying that on your back for 3.5 years. So I don't think you're looking at that. You're looking for small things of value. One of the things we're going to do on Exodus is we're going to rebuild the tabernacle. Please try to get something for the tabernacle, whether it's the gold or silver or bronze, whether it is the acacia wood, or whether it is, in fact, the vegetable dye. We've got blue, we've got red, we've got purple dyes, or the linen. And I look at it, and because it's highly twisted linen, there's a particular type of linen that is more twisted than the other, and that is called tow linen, T-O-W, like tow in a truck. And it is a shorter fiber, and therefore it is spun tighter. I would suggest, as many people as possible, grab some linen, because we got to build some stuff for a tabernacle. Now, that's my position. Again, everything is done with the tabernacle is done by donations, so you don't have to give anything if you don't want to. But that's what I'd be looking at. If I'm leaving Egypt, I want to take something that's going to work for the tabernacle. We're going to get things after that. We're going to keep plundering all the way through the Exodus. Don't you worry about it. The fact that you think, oh, I got, this 5 really nice gold rings from the Egyptians, they mean nothing. You're going to have probably 100 gold rings by the time you get to the Promised Land. Don't worry about it. I mean, this is nothing compared to what you'll be picking up along the way. So again, because of that, make sure it's something good for the tabernacle. Now, the other issue there, because we now have an issue of potentially when, again, dependent upon the Antichrist being revealed, we've got a where we go, which is starting in Egypt. We have a how we go, again, either by boat or by plane. And again, remember, there are some people that are already going to be in Egypt. And for those people who are already in Egypt, they're already there. They don't have to go anywhere. Remember, in the first Exodus, when they went to Egypt, Joseph was already there with his 2 boys. There will be some in Sudan. They're just going to walk on up. No big deal. Some from Morocco. They'll just come over. Not a big deal for them. But those from America, we've got to get there. It's a little bit more of a problem for us. The other issue is, remember in Matthew 24, and he is telling in verse 15 and 16, when you see the abomination that causes desolation, and I spoke briefly about it, and again, there is a video I did on Daniel 12 where you can get a lot more details. The abomination is 4 days before Passover. When you see the abomination that causes desolation, let the reader understand, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. And specifically, he was on the Mount of Olives in verse 3 of Matthew 24. Zechariah indicates he stands on Mount Olives and splits it in 2. And so they would go through the Mount of Olives to escape. Where are they going when they escape? And when he said, let those who are in Judea leave first, is that Torah? Because our Messiah was a Torah teacher. He would only be teaching Torah. So if we look at Genesis 46, which is when Israel or Jacob went to Egypt, in verse 28, who went first? It was Judah. Judah shows the way. So what do we hear from Matthew 24? Judah leads the way to Egypt. Again, it's all Torah. It's always Torah. The whole idea is we follow Torah. Following Torah, we're going to be fine. If Torah and the Messiah, we should be fine. Now, the next thing comes in, and that is, okay, can we define, because if we're in this time frame right now, and we see these things going on in the world that seem pretty bad, actually, before I even do that, let's lock in when those seals could have started. And to see when the seals were started, remember when we said in Matthew 12, verse 5, that he was snatched up to God into his throne? That was pretty much a clue. So let's go for a second to Revelation chapter 5. And when we go to Revelation chapter 5, we have in verse 1, then I saw on the right hand of him who sat on the throne. So the first question is, who's sitting on the throne? And that's the Father. A scroll with writing on both sides and sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming in a loud voice, who is worthy to break the seals and open the scroll? And this verse 3 is the key. But no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth could open the scroll or even look inside it. So at that time, the Messiah was not in heaven, he was not on earth, and he was not under the earth. That only leaves 2 spots, assuming those 2 even exist. The spot between heaven and earth, or the spot above heaven, should there be one. Because again, if he's not in heaven, he's not on earth, he's not under the earth, these are the only 2 other locations that fit. So as we saw that situation with Jupiter in the belly of Virgo, where was he taken? To God and to his throne. Well, we just read in verse 1, who's sitting on the throne? The Father. Verse 4, I wept and wept because no one was found who was worthy to open the scroll or look inside. Verse 5, then one of the elders said to me, do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals. Verse 6, then I saw a lamb looking as if it had been slain, standing at the center of the throne. Who's on the throne? The Father. Where is he at? He's at the throne, to God and to his throne. We just have a wrap-up. So at that point in time, we know, because remember, Jupiter left the belly on October 13th, 2017. Anytime after that is when those scrolls can be opened. So we have an interesting issue now. So right after Sukkot in 2017, assuming we're seeing the signs correctly, that's when the scrolls could have been opened. So anything we see going on right now, and I love people saying, hey, it's Satan doing all this stuff. Those are horsemen. They come from heaven. This is our Father doing this. Now, Satan may be out doing his own stuff, but these horrible things right now are happening. That's from the Father, basically. He's cleaning. He's getting ready to do a massive cleanup on earth. Now, the other thing I wanted to kind of walk through is with regards to there are 2 other issues I want to deal with. One is we can actually identify who the Antichrist is, the being who will be possessed by the Antichrist. And the second one is, why do I do this? So let's kind of walk through the first one, and we get the most of those clues from Daniel 7. Now, we also have one other issue, and that is Ezekiel 39, not a 38, because Ezekiel 38 is the Gog and Magog war that is 1,000 years from now, at the end of all time. 39 is the Gog and Magog war that's coming up. Josephus has indicated that the land of Magog is either Georgia, Ukraine, or Russia. We know it's from the north. Joel 20 is a northern horde. We've got Jeremiah 4:6 and Ezekiel 39:2. Again, because we're talking about Ezekiel 39, it's the far north. So we've got a defined issue of where the Antichrist comes from, the far north. But as we look at Daniel 7, we get much more involved. Now, as we start here, we're going to start around verse 19. And it's going to give us the clues on who the Antichrist is. Well, you know, I type in a verse and not a chapter. So starting in verse 19, because again, we want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. Then I wanted to know the meaning of the fourth beast, which was different from all the others and most terrifying, with its iron teeth and bronze claws, the beast that crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. I also wanted to know about the 10 horns on its head and about the other horn that came up, before which 3 of them fell. The horn that looked more imposing than the others and had eyes and a mouth that spoke boastfully. We don't have enough now to say this is the Antichrist, because all we really have to lock it in is a mouth that speaks boastfully. The Antichrist does, but you see me a couple years ago, I certainly would fit that category. So again, there's a lot more than just that. So in verse 21 and 22, as I watched, the horn was waging war against the holy people and defeating them. That could be more. Until the Ancient of Days came and pronounced judgment in favor of the holy people of the Most High, and the time came when they possessed the kingdom. Ezekiel 48, land division. So now we know this is the Antichrist. Verse 23 and 24. He gave me this explanation. The fourth beast is a fourth kingdom that will appear on earth. It will be different from all other kingdoms that will devour the whole earth, trampling it down and crushing it. There are 10 kings who will come from this kingdom. After them, another king will arise different from the earlier ones. So we have a third thing here. And he will subdue 3 kings. And now that actually is that subdue, humble, or bring low 3 kings. So what we have here is we have now identified a few elements for this Antichrist. One is a kingdom unlike any other before it. There are 10 kings from this country, and the Antichrist is the 11th. The 11th is different than the first, and he subdues, humble, or brings low 3 kings. Now, in 1917, the Soviet Union began from Lenin. Lenin was the leader of the Soviet Union. So let's count them off, because we have looking at the leaders of Soviet Union. We had Lenin. We had Stalin. We had Georgy Malenkov. Nikita Khrushchev. Leonid Brezhnev. Yuri Andropov. Konstantin Chernenko. Mikhail Gorbachev. And then we have one in there that it was there for a total of 3 days. He actually did a coup. Gennady Yanayev. And then he was arrested. And he was later pardoned. But he was, in fact, the king there for 3 days during that coup. And so we're at 9 right now. After that, it ceased to become Russia and became, it ceased to become Soviet Union, became Russia. The 10th ruler, Boris Yeltsin. So whoever number the next king is, we should be able to say is an Antichrist. Next one is Vladimir Putin. Kind of interesting. It looks like our God can see through time pretty easily, because he can certainly count. So we have that particular point. Now there's a 12th there, but we don't have a 12th mentioned in Daniel 7. So 12th is not important. The other aspect there is, where does the Antichrist attack Israel from? He attacks from the north. He comes across the river, which from Daniel 12, which should be the Jordan River, which means he's coming from Syria. Is Russia currently in Syria? The largest naval base that Russia has is in Tartarus, Syria. They've got an air base in Latakia, Syria. Supply depots in Latakia and Tartus. They have about 63,000 troops in Syria with combat experience. That's not everybody, that's just combat experience. Now, for comparison's sake, the height of the Afghanistan war with the U.S. is a bigger army. We sent 100,000 troops. At the height of the Iraqi invasion, we had 150,000 troops. Russia has 63,000 already in Syria. They're ready to go. He's already where he needs to be. Now, the only thing we didn't talk about is whether or not he has humbled, subdued, or brought low 3 kings. Well, I just said he's in Syria. He's running the show in Syria, so the king of Syria is not even a king in his own country. So he's subdued, humbled, or brought low because he's not even a king in his own country. On March 5th, 2020, Turkey had invaded Syria, and they ticked off Putin. So Putin calls up Erdogan, who is the leader of Turkey, and they meet in the Catherine the Great room on March 5th, 2020. That may not mean that much to you and me, but it means something tremendously to somebody from Turkey, because Catherine the Great is the one who destroyed the Ottoman Empire. They were a world power before then. They've never been a world power since then. So that is a factor for somebody in Turkey that humiliated Erdogan. And he told him, you're out of Syria and you can't come back without us giving you an escort. That was embarrassing. On March 7th, 2020, an event happened that I didn't think that much of at the time, because it was with regards to OPEC. And OPEC isn't a nation, it's an organization. And OPEC went to cut oil production because of coronavirus, and they took it to Russia, who was not a member of OPEC, and Russia said, no, we can sell oil for $0 for 4.2 years and we'll still survive. That's how strong our economy is. As soon as the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia came back with Saudi Arabia, the following day he started arresting family members and charging them with treason. Then he's been arresting judges and military leaders and charging them all with treason. Why? Because he's afraid he's going to be overthrown. And since that point, because he was so embarrassed by Putin, he's afraid he's been overthrown. And since that time, it's gotten worse for him because he started doing negative priced oil, where he had to pay somebody to take the oil because he was still producing more than they could consume. So he's destroyed Saudi Arabia. So we've got 3 that have been subdued, humbled, or brought low. Whether those are the 3 that Daniel's talking about, I can't say, but I can certainly say I can point to 3 that it's happened to. Now, and again, so the Antichrist is poised right where he needs to be to attack. Just a question of when, and I don't think it's going to be that long. The other issue here is, why do I say these things? Why do I talk about the Exodus? Because it's not just so you can say, ooh, I see this coming up, okay? If you're a farmer, before you go out and buy your seeds, before you plow your field, you look at the Torah to say, what are the rules? If we see that there's an Exodus coming up, you look to the Torah to say, what are my rules? You don't do something without looking at the Torah first to say, what are my rules? Now, what are the reasons here? Well, in Numbers 11, we have, well, actually, let's start with another one. The shovel. In Deuteronomy 23:13, he says, have a digging instrument among your equipment so that you can bury your poop. Because I walk among the area. So, among the camp. So, you have to have a shovel. Did that make any sense to those people on the first Exodus? When Moses said, hey, have this with you, and they're already at Mount Sinai when he says this, who raised their hand and said, do you want me to go back to Egypt to get one? Because we're already here. Either we brought it with us or we didn't. It didn't make any sense to say it to them. That's screaming that it's only for us. He told them, but it was meant for us, a future generation, to say, make sure you bring a digging tool. Shovel, you don't have to have a big shovel. I'd actually say a small shovel because most things are sand there. The next thing, in Numbers 11, when the quail come, do you eat the quail? Because everybody who ate the quail died while the meat was still between their teeth in Numbers 11, the last verse. The other thing in Numbers 11, they have in Numbers 11, verse 8, they had a grain mill or a mortar and pestle to grind the manna into flour. Do you have that? That's something you need to have prepared. I have a video on my site showing you how to make one very cheap for a mortar and pestle. Not one that you use to grind up spices. We're talking about a half of a gallon per day per person to grind. You're not going to do a small thing. Get a big one. So I'll show you. I've got a video on here. I'll show you how to make one for $8. Very cheap, so you can't complain about the price. The other thing, there's an angel coming to get us. Somebody would say normally, well, you might be a false prophet telling us to leave on the 27th on Passover. I'm not telling you to leave. I'm just saying that's the day that I'm looking at that you should be leaving, but it may or may not happen. But the issue is an angel comes to get you. No angel, no going. Exodus 23:20. Now in Exodus 23:20 it says, be careful of this angel because he comes from the throne room. He has the Creator's name on his forehead. He is not going to forgive your trespasses. So you better treat him very respectfully. And just like Joshua did in Joshua 5, when he comes across the Jordan River and he sees this angel, the first thing he does is he falls on his face and says, what word from the throne room to the slave, to the bondservant or the bond slave? And what he's really doing, he's acknowledging number one, I'm on my face because I'm acknowledging who you are. That you're coming from the throne room and I'm showing you respect. But I'm not worshiping you because I'm saying what word from the throne room. And when you do that, you're showing that angel he's not worshiping me. He's showing me respect and he knows I come from the throne room. So when you do that, you're pretty well golden. Follow the lead of Joshua. He's showing you how to do it. The other thing, on a Passover, do you stay awake on Passover? Exodus 12:42. Guard that, guard that night. Stay on guard, and that's for all generations in Exodus 12:42. So again, on a Passover, do not go to sleep, and obviously have your bags packed. Have them by the door. Don't have them upstairs. You're not, when the angel comes, you're not running back to your room, to your closet to get your stuff. Either you're ready to go or you're not. Have your stuff packed, either have it already in the trunk of your car or right by the front door so you can go. And he says, let's go. You're like, I'm ready. I've got my shoes on. I've got my coat ready. I got my car keys in my hand. I'm ready to go. Everything's packed. All you have to do to me is say, let's go, and I'm gone. So those people who think I'm going to leave in an RV, how are you going to get your RV over to Egypt? Better have a tent. And things are based on weight. And I can tell you right now that the grain mill is the heaviest thing that you're going to carry. And I've done pack weights. I've got everything planned out on where we are, for my group. And I'm bringing a couple of different grain mills. So I should be golden and I can help some other people do things. But a grain mill is 18 pounds. Now, there are lighter ones out there, and I certainly recommend that because how much poundage can you carry? That's the first question in the world. How much poundage can you carry on weight? You got a tent that's going to be about 7 pounds. A pad to sleep on and some blankets. They're going to add some poundage. A pillow. And the other thing is really interesting when you look at the parable of the wedding banquet. He threw out somebody who didn't have wedding clothes. Now we know from Torah that when you reached Mount Sinai, he told you, don't have sex and wash your clothes. Get into your good outfit. I would think you should better have that wedding outfit ready with you when you go. Now, you can point to me and say, I don't see that in Torah. I see that they had to bathe and you're going to put on your best. Because when the Ten Commandments come down, which would be in the Ark of the Covenant, when they come down off that mountain, that's a big deal. You better be in your Sunday, what we used to call Sunday best. I would call that, I hate the word Sunday now because I know who it's related to. That's the Antichrist best. But be in your best clothing, And when the Messiah returns on Armageddon, be in your best clothing. And again, at that future Sukkot, when the wedding supper is happening, be in your best. So those are the things that I see. I'm not doing the path of the Exodus here. I'm going to do the path in another video. And I'll do a couple other videos. But one of the things as well to think about is, again, I've done one on Daniel 12. I certainly suggest you look at that. That will give you an idea of the 1290 and 1335, which, again, if those are answers, if we have two answers, we have two questions, and those two questions will tell you the time and dating of the abomination that causes desolation, and it'll give you the time of when the Antichrist invades Israel and crosses the Jordan River. And then the other aspect that we have from these things, look at how to do a grain mill or buy one. You can get them for 10 pounds. They're not as high quality as the big heavy ones that are 18 pounds. But again, weight is a factor. You're going to be carrying this on your back for 3.5 years. So have something you can carry with you. And like I said, and I did not go through the path, but I'll do that in another video.